I thought I was doing good, he said. I really did. I thought I was protecting people. Who were you protecting them from? Grace asked quietly. Derek was silent for a long moment. People who were not like me, he finally admitted. People who I was taught to fear. People like me, Grace said. Yes, Derek whispered. People like you! Grace felt the weight of his words settle over her. Here was a man who had spent his entire career treating certain people as enemies simply because of how they looked. And now, in the wreckage of his car and his life, he was finally facing the truth about himself. My mother was a civil rights activist, Grace said, her voice soft but clear. She marched with Dr. King in the 60s. She spent her whole life fighting for equality, for justice. And you know what she always said? She said that hate is a poison that destroys the person who carries it. She said that the people who hate are always more damaged than the people they hate. Derek listened, tears streaming down his face. I have seen a lot of people die, Grace continued. That is part of my job. And I have noticed something. At the end, when people know they are running out of time, they do not think about the money they made or the power they had. They think about the people they loved and the people they hurt. They think about whether their lives meant something. She looked at Derek with eyes that held no anger, only a deep, profound sadness. What do you think about, Officer Thompson? When you are trapped in this car thinking you might die, what do you think about? Derek sobbed, his whole body shaking. I think about all the people I hurt, all the people I was supposed to help, but did not. All the lives I made worse because I was too full of hate to see them as human beings. He looked at her with eyes that were clearer for the first time in years. I think about you, standing on that highway in the cold. I think about how you looked at me when I drove away. And I think about how you are here now, saving my life when I did not deserve it. Grace reached through the broken window and took his hand. It was cold and trembling. No one deserves to die alone in the dark, she said. No one. The sound of sirens reached them, growing louder. Help was almost there. They are coming, Grace said. You're going to be okay. Derek gripped her hand tighter. Why? He asked, his voice breaking. Why are you doing this? After what I did to you. Grace thought about the question carefully before answering. Because my mother also taught me that people can change. She believed that even the worst among us can find redemption if they are willing to look inside themselves and face the truth. I do not know if you are capable of that, Officer Thompson, but I am not going to be the one who decides that you do not get the chance to try. The ambulance arrived, followed by 2 fire trucks and another police car. Paramedics rushed down the embankment with equipment and stretchers. Grace stepped back to give them room, watching as they worked to free Derek from the wreckage. One of the paramedics turned to her. Are you the one who called this in? Yes, Grace said. You may have saved his life. Another half hour, and he would have bled out. Grace nodded but said nothing. She did not feel like a hero. She felt tired and cold and sad. A police officer approached her. It was Sergeant Morrison, the same man who had taken her complaint weeks ago. He looked at her with new eyes, eyes that held respect and perhaps a little shame. Mrs. Williams, he said, what are you doing out here? I was driving home from work, Grace said. I saw the skid marks on the road and stopped to check. I found him down here. Sergeant Morrison glanced down at the wreckage, then back at her. The officer in that car is Derek Thompson. I know. Morrison's face went through several expressions before settling on something like wonder. You knew who he was, and you still helped him. Yes. After what he did to you? Grace met his gaze steadily. Sargento Morrison, I filed a complaint against Officer Thompson because what he did was wrong, but that does not mean I want him to die. I am a nurse. I took an oath to help people who were in need. That oath does not have conditions. It does not say that I only help people who deserve it or people who have been kind to me. It says, I help everyone. Morrison was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. Mrs. Williams, I owe you an apology. Your complaint was handled poorly. It should have been investigated more thoroughly. I am going to make sure that changes. Thank you, Grace said. But right now, I think you should focus on Officer Thompson. He has a lot of things he needs to think about. She turned and walked back up the embankment to her car. Behind her, she could hear the sounds of Derek being loaded onto a stretcher, the calls of paramedics coordinating his care. She did not look back. At home that night, Grace sat at her kitchen table with a cup of tea that had long gone cold. She thought about the strange turn her life had taken, about the twisted path that had led her to that embankment at exactly the right time. If she had left work 5 minutes earlier or later, she would have missed the accident completely. Derek Thompson would have died alone in the cold darkness. Was it fate? Was it chance? Was it something else entirely? Grace did not know. But she knew one thing. She had made a choice tonight. A choice that defined who she was and what she believed. She had chosen mercy over revenge, kindness over cruelty. And whatever happened next, she would never regret that choice. Her phone buzzed with a text message. It was from an unknown number. This is Derek Thompson. The nurses gave me your number. I do not know what to say, except thank you. And I am sorry. I know those words are not enough, but I am going to spend the rest of my life trying to make them enough. I am going to change. I have to! Because you showed me tonight what real strength looks like. It does not look like a badge or a gun. It looks like kindness in the face of cruelty. It looks like you. Grace read the message twice, then set down her phone. She did not know if Derek Thompson could really change. She did not know if he was capable of becoming a better person, but she had given him a chance to try. And that was all any of us could do for each other. Marcus and Destiny came into the kitchen, drawn by the sound of their mother's phone. They looked at her with curious eyes. Mom, are you okay? Marcus asked. Grace smiled at her children, the people she loved most in the world. Yes, she said. I am okay. Something happened tonight, and I will tell you about it tomorrow. But right now, I just want to sit here with you for a while. They sat with her, one on each side, and Grace felt a warmth spread through her chest. This was what mattered. This was what was real. Family and love and kindness. Everything else was just noise. The next few days were filled with a tension that Grace had not expected. News of what she had done spread quickly through the hospital, then through the community. The story of the nurse who saved the cop, who had refused to help her, made local news, then regional news. Reporters wanted interviews. People wanted to shake her hand. Suddenly, Grace Williams was famous. She hated it. I did not do it for attention, she told her sister Linda. I did it because it was right. That is all. I know, Linda said, but people need to hear stories like this. They need to know that there is still good in the world. Grace supposed that was true. The world could use more stories about kindness and compassion, but she wished she could go back to her normal life, back to being an ordinary nurse who took care of patients and came home to her children. A week after the accident, Grace received a request that surprised her. Derek Thompson wanted to see her. He was still in the hospital, recovering from surgery to repair his broken legs, and he wanted to talk. Grace did not know if she was ready for that conversation. Part of her wanted to leave things as they were, to move on with her life, and let Derek figure out his own path. But another part of her, the part that had compelled her to climb down that embankment in the first place, told her to go. She went. Derek's hospital room was small and plain, filled with the beeping of machines and the smell of antiseptic. He was propped up in bed, his legs encased in casts, his face still bruised from the accident. When he saw Grace walk through the door, something in his eyes changed. They softened, losing some of the hardness that had been there the night they first met. "You came!" he said. His voice was rough, humbled. "Yes," Grace said. She stood near the door, keeping distance between them. "You wanted to talk." Derek nodded slowly. "I wanted to say thank you in person." And I wanted to apologize. Also, in person! You already texted me those things. I know, but texts are easy. This is hard, and I need to do the hard thing. Grace studied him for a long moment. She saw a man who was broken in more ways than one. His body was damaged. Yes. But there was something else, too. Something behind his eyes that looked like the first stirrings of real change. I talked to the department, Derek continued. I told them everything. About all the people I treated unfairly over the years. About the complaints that were swept under the rug. About who I was and what I did. I resigned. Grace felt her eyebrows rise in surprise. You resigned? I had to! I do not deserve to wear that badge. I never did. He paused, struggling with his words. I have been thinking a lot about what you said, about what people think about at the end, about whether their lives meant something. My life has not meant much good, Mrs. Williams. I have hurt a lot of people. And I cannot undo that. No, Grace said quietly. You cannot. But I can try to do better. I can try to be better. That is what I wanted to tell you. I am going to spend the rest of my life trying to make up for what I have done. I do not know exactly how yet, but I will figure it out. Grace was quiet for a long time. Then she walked to the chair beside his bed and sat down. Do you want to know what I think? Derek nodded, his eyes fixed on her face. I think that change is possible. I have seen it happen. People who were lost find their way. People who were cruel become kind. It does not happen overnight. And it does not happen easily. But it happens. The question is whether you are really willing to do the work. Not just say the words, but do the work. Face all the ugly things inside yourself. Let go of all the hate that has been poisoning you. Learn to see people as people, not as enemies, or threats, or lesser beings. She leaned forward, her gaze intense. That is what real change looks like. Officer Thompson, are you ready for that? Derek met her gaze without flinching. I do not know, he said honestly, but I am going to try. For the first time in my life, I am really going to try. Grace nodded slowly. That is a start! She stood up to leave, but Derek's voice stopped her. Mrs. Williams? Can I ask you something? Yes. How do you do it? How do you stay kind in a world that is so cruel? Grace thought about the question. She thought about her mother, about the lessons she had learned, about the choices she had made. I do not know if I have a good answer, she said finally. I just know that cruelty creates more cruelty. Hate creates more hate. If you want to break the cycle, someone has to be brave enough to choose something different. I try to be that someone. Sometimes I succeed. Sometimes I fail. But I keep trying. She walked to the door, then paused and looked back. You asked me how I do it. Let me ask you something. What kind of world do you want to live in, Officer Thompson? A world full of hate and fear, or something better? She left without waiting for an answer, but she knew that Derek was thinking about it. And sometimes, that was enough. The months that followed were full of change. Derek Thompson kept his word. He started attending therapy, working with a counselor who specialized in helping people unlearn prejudice and hate. He reached out to some of the people he had wronged over the years, apologizing and asking for nothing in return. Most of them rejected his apologies, and he accepted that. He had given them reasons to hate him, and he could not demand their forgiveness. He also started volunteering. First at a food bank, then at a community center in one of the neighborhoods he had once seen as enemy territory. He was awkward at first, unsure of himself, keenly aware of how people looked at him. But he kept showing up. Week after week, month after month, he kept showing up. And slowly, gradually, things began to change. Grace Williams watched from a distance, following Derek's progress through the occasional text message and through the community grapevine. She was cautiously optimistic. He seemed to be doing the work, really doing it. But she also knew that change was fragile, especially for someone who had spent so many years building walls around their heart. Then, one day, almost a year after the accident, Grace received an invitation. Derek was speaking at a community event about his journey, about facing his own prejudice and trying to become a better person. He wanted her to be there. Grace almost said no. She had moved on with her life. The attention from the accident had finally died down, and she was back to being an ordinary nurse, an ordinary mother. Part of her wanted to leave that chapter closed, but Kira said he got the better of her. And maybe something else too. Something like hope. The community center was packed on the night of the event. Grace sat in the back, trying to be inconspicuous. She watched as Derek walked to the front of the room, moving slowly with a cane that he still needed from the accident. His face was different than she remembered. The hardness was gone, replaced by something more open, more vulnerable. My name is Derek Thompson, he began, and I am here to tell you about the worst parts of myself, about the hate I carried for most of my life, about the people I hurt because I was too blind to see them as human beings, and about the woman who saved my life and showed me what real strength looks like. He told the whole story. Every ugly detail. The complaints that were swept under the rug. The people he had treated unfairly. The night he left, Grace stranded on the highway. And the night she saved him anyway. I did not deserve her help. Derek said, his voice thick with emotion. I had done nothing to earn it, but she gave it anyway. Because that is who she is. She taught me something that night. She taught me that kindness is not weakness. It is the strongest thing there is. Strong enough to break through walls that hate built over decades. He looked out at the audience, and somehow his eyes found Grace in the back of the room. I am not the same man I was a year ago. I am not the same man I was my whole life. And that is because one person showed me that change was possible. She did not demand it. She did not even ask for it. She just showed me what it looked like to choose something different. Derek paused, gathering himself. I cannot undo the harm I caused. I have to live with that for the rest of my life. But I can choose differently going forward. I can treat every person I meet as a human being worthy of respect and kindness. I can stand up against hate when I see it, even when it comes from people who look like me. I can try to make the world a little better than I found it. The room was silent when he finished. Then someone started clapping. Then another person. Then another. Soon the whole room was applauding. Not for the man Derek had been, but for the man he was trying to become. After the event, Derek made his way through the crowd to where Grace was standing. They looked at each other for a long moment, two people whose lives had intersected in the strangest possible way. Thank you for coming, Derek said. Thank you for inviting me, Grace replied. There was an awkward pause. Neither of them knew quite what to say. I meant what I said up there, Derek finally said. You changed my life. You saved my life in more ways than one. Grace shook her head slowly. I did not change you, Officer Thompson. I just gave you a mirror. You did the work yourself. You made the choice to look at who you were and become someone different. That takes courage. That takes strength. Derek blinked, surprised by her words. I do not feel courageous or strong. That is usually how it feels when you are doing the right thing, Grace said with a small smile. The easy path is to stay the same. The hard path is to change. You chose the hard path. Give yourself credit for that. They stood in silence for another moment. Then Grace held out her hand. Derek took it, and they shook. A simple gesture that meant more than words could express. Good luck, Derek, Grace said. It was the first time she had used his first name. Keep choosing the hard path. I will, Derek said. I promise. Grace smiled and walked away. Behind her, she could hear Derek being surrounded by people who wanted to talk to him, to shake his hand, to thank him for his honesty. She was glad for him. He had a long road ahead, and he would need all the support he could get. But she had her own road to walk. Her own life to live! Her own choices to make. She stepped out into the cool night air and looked up at the stars. She thought about her mother, about the lessons she had learned, about the woman she had become. She thought about Marcus and Destiny, about the world they would inherit. She thought about all the small choices that added up to a life, and she made a silent promise to keep choosing kindness. It was not always easy. It was not always appreciated, but it was always right. And that was enough. 5 years later, Grace Williams was promoted to head of nursing at Mercy General Hospital. She was known throughout the community for her compassion, her skill, and her unwavering commitment to treating every patient with dignity and respect. She had trained hundreds of nurses, and every single one of them knew her philosophy. Kindness is not a weakness. It is the strongest thing there is. Derek Thompson had become an advocate for police reform. He traveled the country speaking at academies and departments, telling his story and helping to develop training programs that addressed implicit bias and racism. He was not trying to make excuses for his past. He was trying to make sure others did not make the same mistakes. He and Grace stayed in touch, exchanging occasional messages and meeting up once or twice a year to talk. They were not exactly friends. Not in the traditional sense. They were something more complicated. To people whose lives had been changed by a single moment on a cold November night. Marcus had graduated from college and was now in law school, planning to become a civil rights attorney. He often told people about his mother, about how she had taught him that the best way to fight injustice was with justice, not revenge. Destiny had become a nurse, following in her mother's footsteps. She worked in the same hospital where Grace had started, treating every patient with the same kindness and respect she had learned at home. And Grace was happy. Not the loud, flashy kind of happiness that makes headlines. The quiet, steady kind that comes from knowing you have lived your life with integrity. She had made a difference. Not through grand gestures or heroic acts, but through countless small choices made over the course of a lifetime. She still thought about that night sometimes. About the cold highway and the broken down car. About the officer who had refused to help her and the choice she had made when their positions were reversed. She did not think of herself as special. She had just done what any good person would do. But that was the secret, was it not? Being a good person was not about grand gestures. It was about the small choices. The daily decisions to be kind instead of cruel, to help instead of walk away, to see people as human beings instead of categories. Anyone could make those choices. Anyone could be that person. The world was full of broken down cars on cold highways, full of people who needed help and people who had to decide whether to give it. Full of small moments that could define a life. Grace Williams had made her choice, and in making it, she had shown Derek Thompson and everyone who heard their story that another way was possible. Kindness could break through walls that hate had built. Compassion could change hearts that seemed unchangeable. One person choosing to do the right thing could start a ripple that spread further than they could ever imagine. That was the lesson. That was the gift. And it was available to anyone brave enough to take it. On the last day of her career, Grace stood in the hospital where she had worked for 40 years. She was 67 years old, finally ready to retire. The staff had thrown her a party, and the room was full of people who had worked with her, learned from her, been inspired by her. Derek Thompson was there too. He was older now, his hair gray, his face lined with the weight of years, but his eyes were warm, free of the coldness that had once defined them. He stood in the back of the room, watching as speaker after speaker praised Grace for her kindness, her compassion, her unwavering commitment to doing the right thing. When it was Derek's turn to speak, the room grew quiet. Everyone knew their story. It had been told and retold over the years, becoming something like a legend in the community. I am not going to repeat what everyone else has said, Derek began. You all know who Grace Williams is? You know what she has done. You know why we are all here tonight? He paused, his voice catching. But I want to tell you what she did for me. 25 years ago, I was lost. I was full of hate, and I did not even know it. I thought I was a good person because I wore a badge and followed rules. But I was not. I was broken in ways I could not see. He looked at Grace, his eyes shining with tears. Grace showed me who I really was. Not by judging me or condemning me, but by being kind to me when I did not deserve it. By treating me like a human being when I had not treated her like one. By showing me, through her actions, what real strength looks like. He walked toward her, the whole room watching. I owe you everything, he said. Not just my life, though you saved that too, but the person I became. The work I have done. The people I have helped. It all traces back to you. To that night on the highway. To the choice you made. Grace reached out and took his hand. You did the work yourself, she said. The same words she had said to him all those years ago. You chose to change. I just showed you it was possible. Derek smiled through his tears. And that was everything. The room erupted in applause. People were crying, hugging each other, overwhelmed by the beauty of what they had witnessed. Two lives that had intersected in darkness and found their way to light. Later that night, after the party had ended and the room had emptied, Grace sat alone in the quiet. She thought about everything she had seen and done over the course of her life. The patients she had cared for, the nurses she had trained, the children she had raised, the man she had saved. It was a good life. A meaningful life. A life defined by small choices made over and over again. She stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city lights. Somewhere out there, people were making choices. Some were choosing kindness. Some were choosing cruelty. Some were standing at crossroads, not knowing which way to turn. She hoped they would find their way. She hoped they would choose well. She hoped that somewhere, somehow, her story might give them courage. Because that was the thing about kindness. It did not stay where you put it. It traveled. It spread. It touched lives you would never know about. One small choice could change a life. One changed life could change a community. One changed community could change the world. Grace Williams believed that. She had always believed that. And now, at the end of her career, she knew it was true. She smiled and turned away from the window. It was time to go home. But the ripples she had started would keep spreading long after she was gone. That was her legacy. That was her gift to the world! And it was more than enough. The old blue Honda sat on the side of the highway with smoke coming from under the hood. Grace Williams stood next to her car, her phone pressed against her ear, listening to the endless ringing. Nobody was answering. The sun was setting fast, and the November wind cut through her thin jacket like a knife. She had been driving home from her night shift at the hospital when the engine made a terrible sound and died. Grace was a nurse at Mercy General Hospital, and she had been working there for 15 years. She was 42 years old, a single mother of 2 teenagers, and she had never been in trouble in her life. Her car was old, but she took care of it the best she could. Money was always tight, and buying a new car was not something she could afford right now. She saw the police car coming down the highway, its lights flashing in the growing darkness. Relief washed over her. Help was coming. She stepped away from her car and waved her arms, hoping the officer would stop. The police car slowed down and pulled over behind her Honda. Grace waited as the door opened and a white officer stepped out. He was tall, maybe 6'2", with sandy brown hair cut short and a face that looked like it was carved from stone. His name tag said, Officer Derek Thompson. Derek Thompson had been with the Riverside Police Department for 12 years. He was 45 years old, and he had grown up in a small town where people who looked like him made up almost everyone. His father had been a police officer too, and his grandfather before that. The Thompson family had a long history with law enforcement, and Derek believed he was carrying on a proud tradition. But Derek had another side to him, a side that he kept hidden most of the time. He had ideas about people, ideas that had been planted in his head when he was young and had grown like weeds over the years. He believed that certain people were better than others, and those beliefs colored everything he did, even if he did not always admit it to himself. When Derek walked toward the broken-down car and saw Grace standing there, something in his face changed. It was subtle, just a slight tightening around his eyes, a small curl at the corner of his lips. But Grace saw it. She had seen that look many times in her life, and it always meant the same thing. "Good evening, officer," Grace said, her voice polite and calm. She had learned long ago how to handle situations like this. Stay calm. Be respectful. Do not give anyone a reason to cause trouble. My car broke down. I think something is wrong with the engine. Could you help me call a tow truck? Derek looked at her car, then looked at her. He took his time, letting his eyes move over her worn jacket, her comfortable work shoes, the scrubs she was still wearing under her coat. His gaze was cold, assessing like he was looking at something he found distasteful. You got registration and insurance for this vehicle? He asked. Grace nodded quickly. Yes, sir. Everything is in the glove box. Let me get it for you. She moved toward her car, but Derek held up his hand. Hold on. I did not say you could move. Grace froze. Her heart started beating faster, but she kept her face calm. I am sorry, officer. I was just going to get my papers. I will tell you when you can move, Derek said. His voice was flat, without any warmth. Now, what are you doing out here this late? I am coming home from work, Grace said. I am a nurse at Mercy General Hospital. I worked the night shift, and I was driving home when my car just stopped. Derek looked at her with obvious doubt. A nurse? Huh? You got any proof of that? Grace felt a spark of anger, but she pushed it down. My hospital ID is in my purse, in the car. Fine. Get your registration, insurance, and this ID you are talking about. Move slowly. Grace walked to her car with careful, measured steps. She could feel Derek watching her every move, and it made her skin crawl. She opened the passenger door and reached into the glove box, pulling out her documents. Then she grabbed her purse from the floor and took out her hospital ID badge. She walked back to Derek and handed everything to him. Derek took his time looking through the papers. He checked every detail, holding the documents up to the fading light, taking much longer than necessary. Grace stood in the cold, her arms wrapped around herself, waiting. This all seems to be in order, Derek finally said. He handed the papers back to her, but his face had not softened at all. So your car broke down. What do you want me to do about it? Grace blinked, surprised by the question. I was hoping you could help me call a tow truck, or maybe give me a ride to the nearest gas station so I can call someone. Derek laughed, but it was not a friendly sound. Lady, I am not a taxi service. And I am not calling anybody for you either. That is not my job! But officer, it is getting dark, and I am alone out here. Is there nothing you can do to help? Derek shrugged his broad shoulders. Not my problem. You should have taken better care of your car. Or maybe bought a better one? Anyway, I got real police work to do. You will figure something out. Grace felt her heart sink. Please, officer, I do not have any other way to get help. My phone is almost dead, and no one is answering. Sounds like a personal problem to me, Derek said. He was already turning back to his car. Maybe next time you will plan better. Officer Thompson, Grace said, her voice rising slightly, despite her efforts to stay calm. I am a citizen asking for help. Is it not your duty to protect and serve all citizens? Derek stopped and turned back to face her. His eyes were hard and cold, and for a moment, Grace felt afraid. Let me give you some advice, he said, his voice low and dangerous. Do not tell me what my duty is. I have been doing this job longer than you have been wiping noses at whatever hospital you work at. I know what my duty is, and it does not include being a personal assistant to every person who cannot take care of their own problems. He paused, and when he spoke again, his words were like venom. People like you always want someone else to fix everything for you. Always expecting handouts. Well, not from me. You can wait out here until someone else comes along. Maybe one of your own will help you out. Grace felt the words hit her like a punch to the stomach. There it was, out in the open. The ugly truth she had suspected from the moment she saw his face change. He was not refusing to help her because he was busy. He was refusing to help her because of what she looked like, because of who she was. I understand, Grace said quietly. She would not give him the satisfaction of seeing her upset. Thank you for your time, officer. Derek snorted and walked back to his car. He got in, slammed the door, and drove away without looking back. The taillights of his police car disappeared into the darkness, leaving Grace standing alone on the empty highway. She watched him go, feeling a mix of anger, hurt, and disbelief. 15 years she had spent taking care of people at that hospital. Black, white, brown, it did not matter. When someone came into her care, she treated them with kindness and respect. She had held the hands of dying patients, comforted grieving families, and worked double shifts during emergencies. And this man, this officer, who was supposed to protect everyone, had looked at her and decided she was not worth helping? Grace took a deep breath and let it out slowly. She could not stand here feeling sorry for herself. She needed to find help. Her phone had only 5% battery left, and the nearest exit was at least 2 miles away. The temperature was dropping fast, and she was not dressed for a long walk in the cold. She tried her phone one more time, calling her sister who lived across town. This time, someone answered. Grace! What is wrong? Linda! Thank God! Grace said, relief flooding through her. My car broke down on Highway 15, about 3 miles past exit 23. Can you come get me? I will be there as fast as I can, Linda said. Are you okay? Are you safe? Grace looked at the empty highway, thinking about Derek Thompson and his cold eyes. I am fine, she said. Just cold. And Linda, I have a story to tell you when you get here. While she waited for her sister, Grace made a decision. She was not going to let this go. She was going to file a complaint against Officer Thompson. She did not know if it would make any difference, but she had to try. People like him needed to be held accountable. If she did not speak up, how many other people would he treat the same way? She did not know it then, but this night was going to change everything. For her and for Derek Thompson. The universe has a way of bringing things full circle, and sometimes the person you refuse to help becomes the only person who can save you. 45 minutes later, Linda pulled up in her old pickup truck. Grace climbed into the warm cab gratefully, her body shaking from the cold. Linda looked at her with worried eyes. "What happened?" "You look upset." Grace told her everything about the smoke coming from her car, about calling for help, about Officer Thompson and the way he had looked at her, spoken to her, dismissed her. By the time she finished, Linda was gripping the steering wheel so hard her knuckles had turned white. "That is disgusting," Linda said. "He cannot treat people like that. You need to report him." "I know," Grace said. "I will. First thing tomorrow morning." They arranged for a tow truck to pick up Grace's car, and Linda drove her home. Grace lived in a small house on the east side of town, in a neighborhood that was mostly working-class families trying to make ends meet. Her two children, Marcus, who was 17, and Destiny, who was 15, were waiting for her when she walked through the door. "Mom, what happened?" Marcus asked, his young face creased with concern. He was a tall boy, nearly as tall as his mother now, with his father's eyes and his mother's determination. "You are late." "We were worried." Grace hugged her son, then her daughter. "My car broke down," she said. "Aunt Linda came to get me. Everything is fine." But Destiny, who was observant beyond her years, could see that everything was not fine. "Mom, what else happened? You look sad." Grace sat down on the couch and told her children a simplified version of what had happened. She did not want to burden them with all the ugly details, but she also believed in being honest with them. The world could be cruel sometimes, and they needed to know that. They also needed to know how to handle it with dignity and strength. "That is not fair," Marcus said, his hands clenched into fists. "He should have helped you. That is his job." "You are right," Grace said. "It was not fair. And I am going to file a complaint about it. But I want you both to remember something. There are people like that man out there. People who will judge you before they even know you. You cannot control what they think or how they act, but you can control how you respond. You can choose to be better than them. You can choose to treat everyone with kindness, no matter how they treat you. That is what makes a difference." Destiny nodded slowly. "Like what you always tell us about being the bigger person?" "Exactly like that," Grace said, pulling her daughter close. "Now, it is late, and you both have school tomorrow. Go, get some sleep." After the children went to bed, Grace sat alone in her living room, thinking about the night. She thought about Officer Thompson and wondered what had made him the way he was. Was he born with that coldness inside him, or had something put it there? She wondered if he had a family, if he had children of his own. Did he teach them to hate the way he did? She did not have the answers to those questions, and she probably never would. But she knew one thing for certain. She was not going to let this experience define her. She was going to use it to make things better, even if it was just a little bit better. That was all anyone could do. Grace finally went to bed around midnight, but she did not sleep well. She kept dreaming about cold highways and flashing lights, and a man who looked at her like she was nothing. She did not know that, in just a few weeks, she would see that man again, under very different circumstances. And when that day came, she would have a choice to make. A choice that would define who she really was. The next morning, Grace called Mercy General to explain that she would be late for her shift. Then, she drove Linda's truck to the Riverside Police Department to file her complaint. The building was a large brick structure that had been standing since the 1970s, functional but not welcoming. Grace walked through the doors with her head held high and her heart beating fast. She approached the front desk, where a young woman in civilian clothes was typing at a computer. "Can I help you?" the woman asked. "Yes," Grace said. "I would like to file a complaint against an officer." The woman's face did not change, but something in her eyes shifted. "Have a seat, please. Someone will be with you shortly." Grace sat in one of the plastic chairs along the wall and waited. Around her, people came and went. Officers in uniform walked past without looking at her. The minutes stretched on, turning into half an hour, then an hour. Grace remained patient. She had waited longer for less important things. Finally, a door opened and a man in a suit stepped out. He was older, maybe in his 50s, with gray hair and a tired face. "Mrs. Williams? I am Sergeant Morrison. I understand you want to file a complaint. Come with me, please." Grace followed him into a small office and told her story. She gave every detail she could remember, including the time, the location, Officer Thompson's name and badge number, and the exact words he had used. Sergeant Morrison listened without interrupting, taking notes on a yellow legal pad. When she finished, he set down his pen and looked at her with an expression she could not read. "Mrs. Williams, I appreciate you coming in. I want you to know that we take all complaints seriously. However, I must be honest with you. These things can be difficult to prove. It will be your word against Officer Thompson's." "I understand that," Grace said. "But I am telling the truth, and I am willing to swear to it if I have to." Sergeant Morrison nodded slowly. "Very well. We will investigate. You will hear from us." Grace left the police station with a hollow feeling in her chest. She had done what she could, but she had a feeling that nothing would come of it. The system protected its own. She had seen it happen before, and she would probably see it happen again. But at least she had tried. At least she had stood up and said that what happened to her was wrong. Sometimes that was all you could do. What Grace did not know was that her complaint was not the first one filed against Officer Derek Thompson. There had been others over the years. Several others. Each one had been investigated, and each one had been dismissed for lack of evidence. Derek was smart. He knew how to stay just on the right side of the line, how to make his behavior look acceptable on paper even when it was anything but. But the complaints were adding up. And somewhere in the police department, someone was starting to pay attention. 2 weeks passed. Grace got her car fixed, though it cost her more than she could really afford. She went back to work, taking care of patients who needed her, trying not to think about that night on the highway. The police department never called. She was not surprised. Life went on. December came with its cold winds and early darkness. Grace worked extra shifts to save money for Christmas presents. Marcus applied to colleges and waited anxiously for responses. Destiny brought home a report card full of good grades and a smile that lit up the room. And then, on a cold Tuesday night, everything changed. Derek Thompson was driving home after a late shift, his mind wandering to the upcoming holidays. His wife had left him 3 years ago, taking their 2 daughters with her, and now he spent most holidays alone. He told himself he did not mind, that he was better off without them, but the loneliness aided him in ways he would never admit. He was driving on Highway 15, the same stretch of road where he had refused to help Grace Williams when he saw headlights coming toward him in the wrong lane. Before he could react, the other car swerved, barely missing him. Derek jerked his steering wheel to the right, trying to avoid a collision. His car hit a patch of black ice. The vehicle spun out of control, leaving the road and plunging down a steep embankment. Derek felt the sickening sensation of falling, saw trees and darkness rushing toward him, and then there was a tremendous crash that shook every bone in his body. When Derek opened his eyes, he did not know where he was. His head was pounding, and there was blood running down his face. The car was crumpled around him like a tin can, and his legs were pinned under the dashboard. He tried to move, but pain shot through his body so intense that he nearly passed out. He was trapped. Derek fumbled for his radio, but it was smashed. His phone was somewhere in the car, but he could not reach it. The engine was smoking, and he could smell gasoline. If the car caught fire, he would burn alive. For the first time in a very long time, Derek Thompson felt real fear. He started yelling for help, his voice hoarse and desperate. But he was at the bottom of an embankment, invisible from the road above. The chances of anyone hearing him were slim to none. Derek thought about his life, about all the choices he had made. He thought about his ex-wife and his daughters, about the chances he had thrown away. He thought about the people he had hurt over the years, the lives he had made harder because of his hate. And in that moment, facing the very real possibility of death, he wondered if any of it had been worth it. Then he heard footsteps above him. Someone was coming down the embankment. "Hello?" A voice called out. It was a woman's voice, calm but urgent. "Hello? Is anyone down there? Help me!" Derek croaked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Please help me!" A flashlight beam cut through the darkness, and then a figure appeared beside his shattered window. The beam moved across his face, and he squinted against the brightness. "Oh my God!" the woman said, and then the light moved again, and Derek saw her face. It was Grace Williams. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Derek stared at her, recognition dawning slowly through his pain-fogged mind. The woman from the highway. The woman he had refused to help. The woman he had dismissed with cruel words and a heart full of contempt. And now she was the only person who could save his life. Grace looked down at the man trapped in the wreckage, the same man who had left her stranded in the cold just weeks before. She saw the blood on his face, the terror in his eyes, the way his body was crushed under the weight of twisted metal. She saw a man who was dying. And she had a choice to make. Grace stood in the cold darkness, her flashlight illuminating the face of Officer Derek Thompson. The same face that had looked at her with contempt, the same mouth that had told her she was not worth helping. Now that face was twisted in pain and fear, and those cold eyes were begging her for mercy. For just a moment, Grace felt something dark rise up inside her. A voice whispered that she should walk away. Leave him there, the way he had left her. Let him feel what it was like to be abandoned, to be treated like he did not matter. It would be justice, would it not? An eye for an eye, a cold shoulder for a cold shoulder. But Grace Williams was not that kind of person. She had never been that kind of person. Her mother had raised her to believe that kindness was strength, not weakness. That the true measure of a person was not how they treated people who could help them, but how they treated people who could not. And right now, Derek Thompson could not help anyone. He was helpless and trapped and bleeding. Hold on, Grace said. Her voice was steady, professional. The same voice she used at the hospital when patients were in crisis. I am going to help you. She pulled out her phone and dialed 911, quickly giving the dispatcher her location and describing the situation. Then she ended the call and turned her attention back to Derek. The ambulance is coming, she said. It will be here in about 15 minutes. I am going to stay with you until then. Derek stared at her, his eyes wide with shock. You? You know who I am. Yes, Grace said simply. I know who you are. Then why? His voice trailed off, choked by pain or shame or both. Grace did not answer right away. She was assessing the situation, using her medical training to figure out what she could do to help. The smell of gasoline was strong, and she knew that was dangerous. But moving him without proper equipment could cause more damage if he had a spinal injury. Because it is the right thing to do, she finally said. And because I am not like you. The words hit Derek harder than the crash had. He closed his eyes, and when he opened them again, there were tears mixing with the blood on his face. I am sorry, he whispered. I am so sorry. Grace looked at him for a long moment. I am not the one you need to be saying sorry to, she said. I am just one person. But how many others have there been? How many people have you treated the way you treated me? Derek did not answer. He did not have to. They both knew the truth. Grace could see that the smoke from the engine was getting thicker. She needed to do something about the fire risk. I will be right back, she said. Do not try to move. She climbed back up the embankment to her car, grabbing the small fire extinguisher she kept in her trunk. Her father had given it to her years ago, telling her that you never knew when you might need it. She had never used it until now. Back at the wreck, she sprayed the extinguisher on the smoking engine, smothering any potential flames. The smell of chemicals mixed with gasoline filled the air, but the immediate danger seemed to pass. Thank you, Derek said, his voice barely a whisper. Grace did not respond. She was checking his vital signs as best she could, looking for signs of internal bleeding or shock. His pulse was fast and weak, and his skin was clammy. He was going into shock. I need you to stay awake, she said, her voice firm. Talk to me! Tell me about yourself. Derek laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. There is nothing good to tell. Tell me anyway! So he did. Through gasps of pain and fits of coughing, Derek Thompson told Grace Williams about his life. He told her about growing up in a small town where everyone looked like him. Where his father had taught him to believe that certain people were dangerous, inferior, less than human. He told her about joining the police force to follow in his father's footsteps. About the pride he had felt the first time he put on the uniform.